My name is Jessica Love, and I'm a member of the Parry Sound and Area Food Collaborative. So glad to see everybody here tonight. It's a bit of a dreary evening, but we'll have lots to learn, and it'll be great to listen to Dr. Saxe speak this evening. So I just want to start our session by acknowledging that we're meeting on Indigenous land. The Mary Street Centre is built on land that is covered by the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850 and the Williams Treaties of 1923, of which we are all a part of. We want to respectfully acknowledge the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people of Wisconsin First Nation and Moose Deer Point First Nation, on whose traditional territory we're on today. Climate change uniquely impacts the physical, social, and cultural well-being of Indigenous peoples, and Indigenous communities are often the first to experience the effects of a changing climate, and yet contribute minimally to the problem. The ongoing structure of colonialism influences and intertwines with the far-reaching causes of climate change. Indigenous people have been stewards and caretakers of the land for generations, understanding the innate connection between humans and the waters, plants, and animals that we live amongst. So we would like to continue the conversations after tonight that look beyond Eurocentric solutions and bring forward Indigenous knowledge and solutions to address the changing climate. And I also just wanted to share that coming up on the 28th to the 30th of November as the 5th annual Gitche Daywin's Storytellers Festival, and they'll be screening Youth Unstoppable, the Rise of the Global Youth Climate Movement, just for your information. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Saxe. She is one of Canada's most respected environmental lawyers with 40 plus years unparalleled experience writing, interpreting, and litigating Ontario's energy and environmental laws. She is the former Environmental Commissioner of Ontario and current President of Saxe Facts. She's continuing some of the work that was done as the Environmental Commissioner and visiting communities like this, like Parry Sound, to share some of her vast knowledge. So before she gets started, I just have one thing to mention. In the middle kind of the aisle over here, you can see there's a bunch of sticky notes and pens. So throughout the presentation, as you think of questions, or at the end, if you can jot them down, there'll be different kind of members floating around and can come grab the questions, and after Dr. Saxe presents, she'll go through any of the questions that we have and answer them. We've also had some that have been submitted online as well. So, without further ado, I will let Dr. Saxe take it away.
Thank you very much, Jessica, and all the members of the Food Collaborative, and thank you for bringing me here, and thank you for coming out tonight. Can you hear at the back? Yes? Okay, good. So this is what I'm going to talk about, the climate emergency. Some of you, I think, have heard me talk before, and yeah, still really bad. And the food cycle and what we can do about it. So, I mean, the bottom line is that the climate emergency is here. Some people still think it's about polar bears or other people in other places later, and it is bad for polar bears, and it will be much worse for other people in other places later, but it's here already. Is it helpful to anyone for me to explain how driving a car is heating up the world? Is that helpful to anybody? No? Okay. So anyway, all of releasing greenhouse gases, greenhouse fuels, giving the world a fever. We're at the highest, so GHGs is the acronym for greenhouse gases, which we're putting in the atmosphere, which are changing the climate. So we are emitting climate pollution at a faster rate than ever before in human history. The level of climate pollution in the air is higher than it's ever been in human history. The temperatures that we have are the highest we have any records of during human history, and the ocean is also becoming acidified, which is very bad for anything that lives there. Whoops, just a minute. So we're trapping all this extra heat because greenhouse gases close the windows, keep the sun's heat from escaping. So we're trapping all this extra heat in the world. And it really only started building up during my lifetime. Well, I see some people here probably as old as me. So where is all that heat? Well, if you can see the chart on the left, if you've got really sharp eyes, you'll see there's a tiny little red line at the bottom. Can you see there's a tiny little red line at the bottom? Some of you can see it. Is this a pointer? Yeah, well, if it's a pointer, I can't point. Anyway, there's a tiny little red line. Because how much of the heat that we're trapping in the world is in the air where we can notice it? About 1%. There's about 3% of the heat has been trapped in soil and vegetation. There's about 3% that's been warming up the ice. Where's all the rest? It's in the water. It's in the lakes, it's in the oceans. Now what happens when you warm up water? 3 big things that I hope you learned in grade 3. First thing, when you warm up water, it takes up more space. What does that do to sea level? Does it matter if you believe in it? There's other things, of course, that are also raising sea level. Second thing, when you warm up water, it holds less oxygen, right? That's important for anything that needs to breathe in the lakes and the bays or the ocean. And the third thing, again, there's a clue on the slide. Storms are heat engines. Where do they get their power? They get their power from the heat in the water. The more we heat the water, the more explosive we can expect the storms to be. So there's lots of bad news about the climate, and my experience has been that when people get lots of bad news, mostly what they want to do is hang on and wait for normal to come back. Have you ever noticed that? Well, what we mean by normal, for most people, certainly my age, is the average of the 20th century. That's what our laws are designed for. That's what our infrastructure is designed for. That's what our half-load seasons are designed for, and our seeds and most other things. They're designed for the average of the 20th century. That's that 0 line on that chart. Now, I hope you can see we don't live there anymore. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when we did, but we do not live there anymore, and we know that it cannot come back, and this is why. It takes about a generation between the time that we emit climate pollution into the air and the time that we really start to experience the effects. So this is showing you the effects, mostly of what we emitted up to about a generation ago. Well, what's happened since then? Well, we know that a generation ago, the basic science of climate change was pretty clear. It was 1988 when Jim Hansen went to the American Congress and testified about the climate crisis and what was causing it. It was 1992 when all the countries of the world signed an international treaty, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, in which all the countries of the world agreed that we would reduce our carbon footprint in order to keep global temperature from rising more than 2 degrees because we knew it would be really catastrophic and went beyond it. And since that time, since we had that knowledge and we made this international treaty, what have we done with our emissions? First of all, did they go up or down? Up. Faster and faster and faster, so there you go. That's what's happened to carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Faster and faster every day. Now you've heard, I hope, of 350.org. Some of you have heard of 350.org. If you haven't, you can look it up later. So this is an organization started by Bill McKibben about, 10 to 15 years ago. But the number was chosen because 350 is our best estimate of the highest level of carbon dioxide we can have for long and still have a stable climate. It's the kind of climate that people and our crops and the plants and animals that we coexist with evolved to expect. 350 parts per million is the highest we can have for long. And we blew past that in 1988. So this year, for the first time, we hit 415.7 parts per million. But that's really astonishing. I'm from an evidence-based profession. I was a lawyer for 40 years before I became the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario, which I'm not anymore. You may know Mr. Ford passed special legislation to break my contract and abolish my office and try to shut me up, but I'm still talking. Anyway. you can only get evidence from what's happened before. So what happened to people the last time carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was at 415 parts per million? There weren't any people. It was millions of years before there were people. So we were in completely uncharted territory. And we're going there faster and faster and faster. It's like being in the Titanic, seeing the iceberg right down there at the exit sign and saying, let's go faster at that. Because we know what we're doing, and we're doing it anyway. So, what are the impacts? Well, there's lots of impacts around the world. But we are warming in Canada 2 to 3 times as fast as the world average. Here in Ontario, so the general benchmark is that the whole world has warmed a little over 1 degree centigrade in the last century and a half. In Ontario, we've warmed 1.7 degrees just since 1948. And we're on track to 2.5 to nearly 4 degrees in the next few decades. But also, if you can see at least that on the map, there's places that are different colors. I hope you can at least see that much. Well, what this map is prepared for me. It shows the length of the growing season, the frost-free season in Ontario, and how it's changed over the last 4 decades. Now, there are parts of Ontario where the growing season has increased 13 days a decade for 4 decades already. That's lightning speed if you're a moose or a tree. And there's parts of Ontario, the blue bits, where the growing season has increased not at all in 4 decades. So the only point of this is that although the climate crisis is global, the impacts can be actually surprisingly local. You might also see those brown bits in the middle. Can you see there's some brown bits in the middle? So that's the area of the boreal forest that's been warming the fastest. Well, a year and a half ago when we had all those fires, guess what happened in those areas? Right? It's hotter, drier, you get more. I never know whether to show this slide or not. People don't like Toronto all that much, but we have much better temperature records in Toronto than we do in Parry Sound. So going back for just a century and a half, the same period of time that the world as a whole has warmed a little over 1 degree centigrade. How much has Toronto warmed? More than 3. That has all kinds of impacts on inequality and who can sleep at night without air conditioning and other kinds of things. In terms of precipitation, look at the last 4 decades. Now, there's parts of Ontario that are noticeably drier in the summer, but in the winter, Ontario is wetter than it used to be. But as you can see, it's not the same everywhere. There are some places that get a heck of a lot more precipitation now in the winter over the last 4 decades than they did before. And a lot of what used to come as snow in the winter now comes as rain or ice or freezing rain or drizzle or other kinds of things, which is, again, really bad if you're a moose, right? Moose, for example, exquisitely adapted for cold and snow. Not at all adapted to getting rained on in February and then frozen, or having their food rained on and then coated in ice. Also affects floods, also affects infrastructure breaking down. So if you think about Thunder Bay, there people tell me that they used to count on it would freeze in October and it would stay below 0 until April. Doesn't do that anymore. So now they're seeing concrete breaking down. A lot of places have to use a lot more salt. Waterloo has to use a lot more salt in the winter. That's contaminating their drinking water. So this is causing changes. Now, everything I've talked about so far is about averages. Averages are really helpful to get a general sense of direction, but they don't tell you the whole story. So if your head's in the oven and you have 3rd-degree burns, and your feet are in the freezer and you have frostbite, on average you are? But in fact, you need to go to the hospital, right? Because you've got real injuries. Well, it's the same thing about the climate crisis. The averages only tell us a little piece of the story. What's doing most of the damage in the short run is the extremes. There's a lot of different ways of measuring the extremes, and so I went to those wild and crazy people, the actuaries. Anybody know an actuary? Now, they don't go back to 1948, they don't go back to 1850, they go back to ancient history, 1960. So they use this as their baseline because they've got really good data for the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s. And they say compared to them, how many people are alive in the 1960s, 70s, or 80s? Okay, compared to then, how much worse are climate extremes in Canada and the United States? So we are the luckiest people in the world. Clue is on the slide. 4 times more. We already have 4 times more extremes. This is just what's happened already. And the climate crisis is just starting to gain speed. You hear people sometimes talk about new normal. You hear this on the radio every summer, say, oh yeah, we got new normal. This is nonsense. New normal is when you gain 10 pounds, you expect to stay there, and you buy new pants. If you were gaining 10 pounds faster and faster and faster, those new pants wouldn't do you any good. That's where we're at. We're not seeing a new normal, we're seeing the end of normal. We're really starting to accelerate out of what we know. So extreme weather didn't start with the climate crisis. We've always had extreme weather. But we know that the climate crisis makes extreme weather more frequent and more ferocious. And we're starting to see that all around the world. You can see it every time you turn on the news. Fires and floods and drought and heat and wind. Last year, May the 4th, we had a windstorm that cost something between $300 and $400 million in just a few hours, just here in Ontario. So these pictures are all pictures from Ontario for the last couple of years. We can also see it in the insurance losses reported by the Insurance Bureau of Canada. For those who are wondering, there's no inflation in this figure. This is constant dollars. It's adjusted for GDP. It's not just a general increase in wealth effect. These are real increases in constant dollars in insured losses from extreme weather. And in fact, the losses are worse than they show on this slide for 2 reasons. The first one is, these are only insured losses paid by the insurance company. There's lots of things that the insurance company doesn't pay for. For example, the Insurance Bureau has reported that for every $1 billion they spent, and they spent $1.4 billion last year, their best estimate is that the public sector, everything you pay for with your taxes, is losing $3 billion in infrastructure damage and other kinds of losses. But the second thing is, those with sharp eyes will see there's 2 colors of bars on the chart. Right? You see these 2 colors? So, because until 2007, the Insurance Bureau used to report all losses from extreme weather. But since 2008, they only report what they call losses from catastrophic extreme weather, by which they mean individual events that cost more than $25 million in damages. So if we had all the figures on the same basis, that line would be going up faster and faster. So who thinks that this might affect the cost of insurance? Who thinks this might affect the availability of insurance? Who thinks this might affect what people decide to pay for insurance? And which ones decide to take a chance? And what happens to them after the next flood or fire or storm? So what's ahead? Well, this is increasingly clear, and I do agree with Greta. The world is on fire. I've been through a home fire. It is not a pretty thing. And you know what? When your house is on fire, you start paying attention to different things. Our home's on fire. And the clearest explanation we have about what's ahead in the lifetime of today's children, because that's what this century is, right? This century is the lifetime of today's children. A baby born today is only 81 at the end of the century. 81 is not as old as it used to sound. So, the clearest summary of this we have is from the Special Rapporteur to the United Nations Human Rights Council. He was more blunt than these reports usually are. So he asked, what is the best case we could expect this century, that is in the lifetime of today's children? Widespread death and suffering. What's the worst case? Humanity on the brink of extinction. I am really dreading the time that these two can ask me, what's going to happen and what have I done about it? Because the oldest one is 6 now. It's going to only be a couple more years before he knows. What can we say to them? Because on our watch, just in the last 30 years, the climate pollution has doubled. That was after we had the science. That was after we knew it would happen. And we've done it for our own convenience. And we've had alternatives. So there we go. So what's coming? So people ask me often, well, I don't know who to believe. I don't know, I hear so many different things, I don't know what to believe. So there's a really simple answer to that. These are the people you believe, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So remember I told you 30 years ago, all the governments of the world got together, signed an international treaty about the climate crisis. And the governments recognized that they were going to need to have a consensus, reliable source of information on the science. And so they set up what I think is the largest scientific collaboration in human history. Thousands upon thousands of scientists from all around the world have been working together for more than 30 years. And then every word they write has to be vetted and approved word by diplomats from every country. So believe me, anything that can be beaten out of it gets beaten out of it. And when we get through that entire process, they issue these reports signed by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They are the most reliable science in the world. If you get on a bridge and you believe that the science of the bridge will stand up, you should believe this stuff. So they have their main job is to come out with big reports every 8 or 10 years, sort of summarizing overall what we know. The last one was in 2014, the next one was in 3 years. But they were also asked to do 3 special reports that have come out in the last year, and they are stunning, heart-rending, terrifying reports, and I'm going to tell you just a bit about them. So the first one is this question of, basically, how bad is 2 degrees going to be, right? The international treaty 30 years ago was we're going to keep below 2 degrees because we were pretty sure it would be bad to get to 2 degrees. But what has become clearer and clearer is that it's not safe to get all the way to 2 degrees. And so the IPCC was asked, how much worse is 2 degrees than if we stayed at 1.5 degrees warmer? So that was the first report. It came out a year ago, and basically here's the answer. It's a lot worse. 2 degrees is a lot worse than 1.5. Large, robust, widespread differences in precipitation and drought and sea level and extreme heat and so on. But the biggest difference is that at 1.5 degrees, most human and natural systems can be expected to cope, to adapt, to manage somehow. And once we get past 1.5 degrees, then the ability of human and natural systems to cope with the changes start to break down. That was the first report. The second report was about land and food, right? Food's pretty essential to human population. We have a large and growing human population. And what they said was, first of all, that the climate crisis is already hurting the nutritional value and the security of food. And that the way we're headed, if we keep on delaying business as usual, we've got high risk food blow past 1.5 degrees, very high risk food blow past 2 degrees. A food supply that's less stable, much more expensive. Rapid declines in agricultural productivity, especially in the hotter countries of the world. Irreversible damage to niche land and ecosystems, more wildfire, more conflict, more people on the move. That came out in August. Come on. In September, we had an even more scary report on basically everything in water. The oceans and everything frozen. Snow, ice, permafrost, which is what they call the cryosphere. So the shorter answer to that is that everything frozen is melting faster and faster and faster and faster. Did you know there was no ice left on the coast of Alaska this summer? Last year, in the middle, in the Bering Sea, it's dark for months. In February, in the dark, 1/3 of the ice in the Bering Sea melted in 8 days. The oceans are in crisis from acidification, from warming, sea level rising faster and faster. Coastal cities at risk. We had, if that weren't enough, we had another report that came out just a couple of weeks ago that took this information about how high is the sea and compared it to how low is the land where people live. And they looked with really accurate measuring devices of where people live. And they said, well, where people live now, where the sea level will be at the rate we're going in the next few decades, the next 3 decades, we can expect 150 to 300 million people basically to have their homes underwater at high tide. How often does high tide come? Twice a day. Do you think those people will stay there in their flooding homes and leave us in our splendid isolation here in Canada? Where we're a long way from sea level, a long way from the equator, we still got food and water. Do you think they're going to be happy to let us stay here like that and they stay where they are? What do you think? Hands up. Would you? And then, if you don't care about people, how about birds and wild creatures? Because in addition to the whole international treaty structure we have about climate change, we have another whole treaty structure and set of studies about everything wild except us. And they also put out a massive report this year saying there's already 1 million species and direct risk because of the climate crisis. We know as well there's 3 billion birds already missing from North America. We can see biological systems at the edge of collapse and starting to collapse in many parts of the world. These are the natural systems on which our own lives depend. That's not enough. How about human health? So you have the World Health Organization also piled in to say that the climate crisis is either one of or the largest human health crisis this century. And basically, for every dollar we would spend now on reducing rates of fossil fuels, we'll get $2 back in health benefits. We can already see the impacts. Winter's not as cold as it used to be. We don't, and so ticks and other vectors that used to be kept out of Ontario because we had really ferocious winters, they're not anymore. And so you can see Lyme disease spreading more and more. How many of you personally know someone who's been affected by Lyme disease in Western Isles? And we'll look around. When I started giving climate talks, there'd be 1 or 2 people in the audience. Now it's regularly a third or a half. And this can really change your life like forever. When I was a kid and I went camping, all right, I burned my fingers and I, fell off rocks and could fall in the water, whatever, but I wasn't going to change my life unless I drowned. Parents made sure I knew how to swim. When I took my kids to the woods, they burned their fingers and they fell off rocks and they would fall in the water, and I made sure they knew how to swim, and I didn't think I changed their life. Now when I take my grandchildren to the woods, I'm frightened. And they tell me that within 10 to 15 years, the mosquitoes that carry Zika will be able to overwinter in Ontario. And what else? And there aren't any big mistakes. Whatever you care about, the climate crisis is a threat multiplier. It makes everything else harder. And we can't count on magic. When I was putting together this presentation, it took maybe 4 minutes to find 2 headlines in right-wing media saying, oh, the answer's magic. It would be lovely. Like, I would be so happy if there was some magic bullet that we could just pull out and we could deploy everywhere right away and it would solve the problem. We wouldn't have to change anything else. Who would vote for that? Right? Everybody. If I said I had it in my pocket, would you believe me? Although I will say, some guy came up to me Tuesday night, tell me he had the magic bullet. Okay, great. But there is just no evidence that it exists. And so people who say we can just continue doing what we want, we can continue driving the cars we want, we continue to, and by the way, we in Canada, you'll be delighted to know, who drives the most climate polluting vehicles in the entire world? Hands up, it's us. Yes, we have beaten out the United States for the most climate polluting cars in the whole world. Congratulations. I think it's our first year as #1. But if we say, all right, we can keep doing that. We can keep driving our SUVs and flying as much as we want. We can keep living our lives as we want because there's going to be magic. That's betting the whole planet on magic. That's betting our kids' future on magic. I don't think that's safe. What about trees? Will trees do it? Certainly, of course, we should plant trees. We need trees. There's lots and lots of reasons to plant trees. We need them. We need them to hold the water when the rain falls. We need them for cooling. We need them for maintaining the fertility of the soil. We need them for lots of things. We need them for wood to build houses out of. But, CO2 from the cars driving by here, probably a fifth to a quarter of that will still be in the atmosphere 1,000 years from now, still trapping extra heat. If you plant a tree tomorrow, will it still be growing in 1,000 years? I mean, I guess if you could plant a redwood or maybe an olive tree, but, right? Most trees are not going to be around in 1,000 years, and also we can see what's happening to a lot of trees. And we have these terrible diseases coming for the trees. Now we have oak wilt. So there's a really terrifying new Canadian novel called The Greenwood. Have any of you read it? It's set in 2038, 10 years after the forests of the world have died. And I wish I could say I couldn't believe it. But, so this is where we're at, right? We know that there's big unavoidable changes coming because of what we've already locked in. Remember, it's going to take a generation before we experience the impacts of what we emitted today. And the world economy is still 85% dependent on fossil fuels. Ontario's economy is still at least 75% dependent on fossil fuels. And the rate of, Canada's going to pump out an extra billion barrels, a million barrels, or some enormous quantity more barrels of oil next year as we finish another pipeline. So we have a lot of unavoidable changes we are already going to have to cope with, and that's going to be really challenging enough. But if anybody says to you, we don't have to reduce our pollution, we'll just cope with what's coming, they are not giving you straight goods. All the evidence we have says if we keep going as we're going, we're not going to be able to cope. Human and natural systems will not be able to adapt. So we have to do both. We have to adapt, because there's lots of unavoidable change we've already locked in, and we have to reduce our emissions so that we can keep the future changes to something we can cope with. And it is harder to have to do both of them at the same time, but that's what we have created. Now, if we want a 2-degree world, and if we want a world that is only going to warm more than 2 degrees, which was the original agreement of all the countries of the world, look how fast we've got to reduce our emissions from where they are today. We've got to cut today's emissions by at least a quarter in the next 10 years or so, during the working lifetime of whatever's heating this building and my car. That's really hard. And is impossible if we keep increasing fossil fuel production. If we want a 1.5-degree world, which remember is a lot more like the kind of world that we had growing up, then we've got to cut today's emissions in half by 2030, which is only 11 years from now. We are in a collision with physics. Physics doesn't care what we want. It really doesn't. And we've made this harder because we've been dragging our heels this long. So let's see, is this going to run? Sometimes this works and sometimes it doesn't. No, I guess not. Well, anyway, if this animation would run, it's available online on the Planet Lab. It would show you, you could watch how much of the space to 1.5 degrees has been used up during your lifetime, and you'd see we're basically there, but it's not going to run today, it's not going to run. So, is it too late? And people always ask me this, is it too late? And I have to say, too late for what? Is it too late for, anybody here care about some young noisy person? Right, is it too late for them to have the same kind of world ahead of them as we had? Yes, it's too late and it's our fault. But it's not too late yet to make a big difference in what's coming. We really are at a pivot point. There's a lot of reasons to think that the decisions we make in the next 10 years could have an impact for 1,000 years. It's on our watch. It's up to us. So, that takes me to food. Because there's a lot of different things we can do about it, but food is one of the pieces. So, I would definitely recommend that you look at Project Drawdown. Because this is a wonderful project that looked at the 100 most practical, cost-effective ways of dramatically reducing our climate pollution and, in fact, taking some of that pollution back out of the air and preserving our future. And 8 of the top 20 are about food. So, people ask me how much of an impact does food have. Well, globally, crop and livestock is about 1/8 of greenhouse gas emissions, and the land clearing to provide agriculture is about another quarter, so an eighth is about a quarter in total. It's not nearly that much in Ontario because we emit so much from our cars and our houses and so on. But anyway, lots of things to pay attention to. And in terms of food, the Land and Food Report, the second of those IPCC reports, they really emphasize there's three big things we need to pay attention to. What we eat, how we grow it, how much of it we throw away, what do we do with what we throw away. So first thing is what we eat. So the average Ontario diet, if you follow the 2007 Canadian Dietary Guidelines, and this doesn't include transportation or cooking or anything, it's just the food itself. So we did this. This was the very last thing that I did. I had closed my office on the end of March. The very last thing we did was this fact sheet. There's some on the back seat there. They're also on my website. The average Ontarian, where does our individual carbon footprint come from? And just so you know, individuals emit more greenhouse gases in Ontario than industry does by quite a bit. So where do we get it from? So half of our emissions are for four things. Clue on the slide. Number one is driving the worst vehicles in the world. Number two is heating leaky homes. We have really leaky homes. Number three, flying. Number four is beef. Now that's average beef. Not all beef is the same, for sure. But on average, Canadian beef has a really big footprint. And then the other food is in that other piece over there. So food choices matter a lot, not just for carbon dioxide. Cattle raising usually also has many other adverse effects, including on water quality. And so you can see the numbers on this. Canadian beef, as you can see, Canadian beef is better than world average beef, but it's still enormously more carbon footprint than anything else you can eat, just about. There are, of course, different ways of growing cattle. So I've had beef farmers come up to me afterwards and say, listen, we're doing intensive rotational grazing. We're not using pesticides, we're not using fertilizers, doing as many things right as possible. And certainly if I eat meat, I don't eat meat, but if I did eat meat, that's the kind of meat I would want to be eating, because a lot of landscapes evolved with large herbivores. And so if the cattle are being managed basically in the behavior of wild herbivores, then they're probably doing more good and less harm, but most cows live in feedlots. Pets too, and yes, I have a dog too, so this is definitely an issue, because certainly my dog eats even, I don't eat any meat, my dog still eats dog food in his dog meat in, so that's a problem. No solution for that one. Even plants, right? If you're buying things with lots and lots of plastic and they've flown out of season from somewhere far away, it's still going to have a pretty big carbon. The second thing is how we grow our food, and here I'm really drawing primarily on the research that was done when I was Environmental Commission, because I had a staff that did the research, and we did two reports, particularly about soils. Because the foundation for all our food is soil. Well, except for things in the ocean, I suppose. But for anything land-based, the foundation really is the soil, and a tremendous amount depends on how we treat the soil. We generally haven't treated the soil very well. So we have this real conflict, and modern agriculture has produced an extraordinary amount of food, which has allowed an extraordinary increase in world population. And the original theory was, okay, this was a great humanitarian thing. We were saving people from starvation, allowed this creation of enormous population, but the environmental cost has been enormous, absolutely enormous. And again, the consequences are becoming more and more obvious. And one of the consequences here in Ontario is this rapid loss of organic matter in the soil. Best estimate we saw was about 30% organic matter already lost. And that hurts everything I care about. Soil that has less organic matter is less resilient in a drought. It'll dry out, the crops will die. It'll less resilient in a flood. It's more likely to flood and the plants will die. It's more likely to erode. Losing topsoil is more likely to need pesticides and fertilizers. More likely to lose those pesticides and fertilizers into the water. It's more likely to be feeding the toxic algae that we're seeing in the lakes. Oh yeah, there you go. I did a slide on it. So lots and lots of reasons why soil health matters, and this is one of the things. We've got this increasing crisis of toxic algae, and not just in Lake Erie anymore. We had, 2 years ago, there were 3 lakes in Algonquin Park where the algae was so toxic that the The rangers told us they were telling people, don't stop, don't drink, don't swim, don't wash in it, just paddle through and get out. And most of the time, that's from phosphorus. And one of the big reasons the phosphorus is being lost is because the soil is eroding and the tools in organic matter. So what keeps soil healthy? Well, we actually know this, right? And a lot of it is old news. The biggest thing, you go by a field and you see just bare soil, you see those lovely straight furrows and bare soil, that soil is losing organic matter and eroding. Keeping the soil covered, the soil should never be bare. There should be live roots in the soil all the time. We should be using cover crops. In Iowa, farmers get a 5% discount on their crop insurance if they have cover crops, because they're less likely to have crop loss that causes a claim on their insurance. It also is protecting everything else that they can. You want to have diversity. You need to have crop rotations. You don't want to kill the good bugs. As much as possible, you want organic good bugs. And whenever possible, you don't use synthetic fertilizers and pesticides because they kill the soil web, these creatures that live in the soil. But basically, the government hasn't cared much. Officially, the Ministry of Agriculture encourages what they call best management practices, but we did a report on this, and they didn't track them, they didn't evaluate them, they gave out hundreds of millions of dollars without doing any follow-up whatsoever as to whether anything was done any good. They don't regulate most of the manure spread in Ontario. They allow winter spreading of manure, which most other places have already banned. They subsidize wetland destruction. Anyway, just talk a good line occasionally, but on the actually in the front lines, it's pretty awful. So we made a batch of recommendations that we thought were pretty straightforward. There's an international initiative. If we could build 0.4% of organic matter back in soil every year, which we know how to do. If you do cover crops and crop rotation, the other kind of things I'm talking about, you will get that much soil organic matter built back up in soil. Then we can take a lot of carbon back out of the atmosphere. We can increase the nutritional value of food. We can preserve a good future with food. We can preserve the land itself. We can keep the water cleaner. And there needs to be financial support. Farmers who go from conventional, highly chemical agriculture to organic can expect to have a loss of income for, on average, 3 years. After that, they'll get better. But if they have to bear that themselves, most can't. So we said, all right, we as a society will be so much better off if more farmers make this transition. Let us support them while they make this change. Wouldn't cost very much, wouldn't last very long, would have enormous benefits for all of us. Anyway, we're not doing it. They did have one small step, which is they're collecting more data about it. So congratulations, Ontario. We are going to have a little more data on soil health. We're not going to have any incentives, but we're going to at least have some data. So I guess that's better than nothing. A little. And then the third thing is what we throw away. So I should say that table in the middle on the back, you probably noticed, so some of my reports are still there. So it turned out that there were some copies rolled away because my reports aren't being printed anymore and can only be obtained online. And I certainly recommend that you look at them. If you're interested in water, this report is on water, the energy footprint of water and the things we can do about it. This one is on waste and recycling and is still quite relevant. This one is on our climate law. So some of this is out of date because our climate law was repealed and we don't have any kind of sensible climate. We don't have any climate law or any legally binding climate targets, and we don't have a meaningful climate plan or any of those kinds of things. But there's still a lot of good pieces in there on options and things that might happen, and some things that the federal government is doing, and also some stuff about freight. And then this is about electricity. And what you hear in the press and you hear politicians saying talking about electricity is wrong a hell of a lot of the time. So this one has actual facts. So then, anyway, what we throw away we studied in the waste report. And again, Ontarians were real champions when it comes to waste. We throw away on average about a ton per person. So congratulations. Well, that's done directly and indirectly. And most of it goes to landfill. And a lot of that is organic waste. And as you can see, less than half of the organic waste actually gets sent to any kind of productive use. most of it goes to landfill, which is a very, very stupid place to put waste because there's lots of consequences to putting organic material in landfill. It contaminates groundwater, it attracts vermin, it creates methane, which is a very underrated, very serious climate pollutant. And it squanders valuable resources. Because the other thing about methane, CH4 is methane, if you emit it into the air, it's 100 times worse than carbon dioxide as a climate pollutant, and it reacts to create ground level ozone, which is a serious human health hazard and damages your lungs. But what else is it? It's fuel. Right? Natural gas is methane. So if you take methane and you put it in the air, not only are we polluting everything we care about, we're also wasting the fuel we could really use. So methane is really undervalued. This is basically, I mean, I can explain this afterwards if you like, but the official inventories where we count how bad methane is, they count it usually as being about 21 or 24 times as worse than carbon dioxide. It's actually more like 100 times. If anybody wants to know, I can try to explain that afterwards. But you can do really good things with methane. Now, no, there are no toilets on the bus. But you can use methane to run buses. And Hamilton, for example, they capture some of the methane from the sewage plant, and I understand they're using some of it in your buses, but they're Canadians, they don't paint it on the bus, so I had to use a picture from the UK. But there's lots of things you can do with methane that's really useful. So, and also this, if you take organic waste, if you take food waste, and you put it in a biodigester, cook it basically, without oxygen, you get a lot of methane, which you can then use to run your bus, but what's left behind is a soil amendment that is tremendously powerful in helping to bring life back to the soil. And also if you compost material into the biodigester, you get compost. And you can see the impact, what they did in increasing the compost level in the soil in terms of the productivity of that soil. So we have so much to gain if we take first of all, minimize our food waste, but then what food waste we do have should never go to landfill. So the solutions are really in the food cycle. We should be using food waste when we have to have it to grow more. We probably don't want more food, right? Food just isn't garbage. So this was our recommendation. First of all, don't waste as much food. We shouldn't be. We waste an extraordinary amount of food in Canada. And for whatever is unavoidably left over, first thing is to feed people. Second thing is to feed animals. The third thing is, okay, use it productively either for compost or for biodigestion to make methane that we use for something. Never, never, never landfill. Now, there's definitely challenges to this. You can't ban organics from landfill until you get somewhere to put it. And we have a pretty broken process for approving new places to put it. That was another part of my life with the Ministry of Environment. And it's cheaper in the short run. If you don't care about the climate, you don't care about the groundwater, and you don't care about wasting the fuel, it's cheap to just throw stuff in the ground. But we have to care about those things. So that's what we recommended. Don't let anybody landfill food waste. And there needs to be a fast, predictable way of providing approvals for composting or digestion. So we have somewhere else to use it safely and productively. But that takes down to, so what can we all do? Well, this is my advice to everyone at every level. We can't leave climate entirely up to the government, and especially not the current provincial government that we've got, because practically everything they're doing is not good for the climate. So these are the three things I ask everyone. First of all, figure out your own carbon footprint and reduce it. You've got to reduce it at least 5% a year. If you want to be at 2 degrees, we've got to be reducing more than 5% a year. And remember, we're the luckiest and some of the most wasteful people in the world. The second is we've got to get ready to adapt for the crazy weather that's coming. So if you have a house that has a basement, how many people have a house with a basement? Okay, so go to the Intech Center website. They give a lot of advice about how to weatherproof your basement. Much cheaper to keep water out than to pay for a flood. The average basement flood costs people about $40,000. And then insurance companies are probably not going to want to renew your insurance, and then you've got other kinds of problems. So much, much better. And I mean, I had that experience with my house. I live in a 100-year-old house. Well, it's more than that by now. And I thought we were in pretty good shape, and I had someone come and inspect it. Anyway, we had a long list of things to do. And the third thing to do, and this is the least, Canadians seem to find this the hardest, is to speak up for collective action. Because the climate crisis, we need individual action, but we can't solve the climate crisis through individual action. It's a collective problem. We need collective action. That's what governments were invented for. And governments will only do things if people speak up and demand it. Because they have lots of pressures pushing them the other way. They need to hear. So, yeah, there we go. And we know that there's only three big tools that really reduce pollution. One is making polluters pay. That's what the carbon price is for. The second is investing in solutions. That's also what the carbon price is for, is to provide the money to invest in solutions. And the third is regulations. And Ontario was doing all of those things until the election in June of 2018 and isn't really doing any of them now. But we go back to food. So Drawdown, there's 8 of their top 20 solutions are all about food. And number 1 is reducing food waste. And who can do something about reducing food waste? Everybody, right? Individually and collectively. And if you're in an area where there is an agricultural area around you, or at least rural land that can use compost, there's just so many wonderful things that can be done to compost. Or you can just use it all in your garden. So I'm saying you've got a great community garden program, community kitchen program. Just food is valuable. Food is precious. You know, we need to treat it with more respect. And it should never be garbage. So, yeah, who would like to have some hope here? Okay, so this is the only formula I know. We have to start with knowledge. We've got to pay attention to facts. You cannot make good decisions if we pretend that there's no facts, or if we accept lies about the facts. We have to start with knowing the facts. And that was my job as environmental commissioner. There's lots of information about facts. And I should say that all 17 of my reports I've reposted on my website because the links to them all got broken after I got fired. But we can't just stop with knowledge because the knowledge is too depressing. We've got to find a way to take action with other people. That's how we get results. That's how we get hope. And you've got your food collaborative here. That's wonderful. We've got other good groups here doing good things. But bring other people in, who aren't the usual suspects. Get other folks involved. And food is such a fun thing to do things with other people. And you've got a great start here. So, and I understand that there is a petition going to council about, Jessica, there was something you wanted me to remind people about. Where's Jessica?
The backyard hens.
Yeah, so there's something coming up where council's going to vote on. Oh, hens.
Hens.
Backyard hens. So, yes, well, Jessica, come talk about it. Because here's a concrete example to improve local food supply, to improve local self-reliance, get a little support. Who wants to talk about it? Okay, somebody. All right. And so there you go. You can take some action tonight.
Hello. Is it working? Yeah, okay. My name is Delana. I work with the Georgian Biosphere and I volunteer with the Parry Sound and Area Food Collaborative. Backyard hens. Currently in Parry Sound, there is no bylaw explicitly stating that residents are allowed to have backyard hens. So there's a letter on the Food Collaborative website that you can download and send to...
and sign.
And sign, yes. That's important, actually. And you can send to council. They're working on amending the bylaws right now anyway, so we're looking to have that explicitly allowed in the bylaws. And then we'll host a workshop on how to keep your hens alive.
And compost the manure, and then you have manure to help, you know, with everything else. Anyway, so there you go. No one can do everything, everyone can do something, so the question is, what will you do? Thank you. Okay, so we had some questions, so go ahead.
So the pads of paper that are in the center, perhaps the people closest to them could sort of circulate them around through the group. And when you've got a question, if you want to maybe just wave it around and someone will come and grab it. Before that, for about the past 6 weeks, the Food Collaborative on our website, we've had an online question submission little tool. So I think maybe we'll just start with some of that. All right, so the first one, I crossed out the ones you've already answered, by the way. So given that both mitigation and adaptation efforts are required and community resources are limited, what are your thoughts on how to prioritize these efforts?
But that's a really tough question. I'm under the climate law that we had in Ontario, when we had one, the law required that the money be spent on mitigation because the judgment of the legislature was that although they're both important, mitigation was more important because it's going to determine the future. But that law's gone now. So, I mean, there's no clear right answer. I guess if I'd had to choose, the default is half and half, but that means we're not, let me try this again. We need to have a science-based target. If we want to stay in 1.5 degrees, we've got to cut our emissions in half. Some of the options for doing that take money, some of them changes in behavior. So from where I sit, we've got to figure out what we're going to do to stay within the world's ability to cope with our pollution, and then we figure out how to pay for it. So, and we're also going to have to adapt. So I would start with the carbon budget and go from there.
Our next question is a good one. Are there any negative outcomes to consuming more of a plant-based diet in terms of human health, planetary health, economic, or mental health?
Well, certainly for myself, I haven't knowingly eaten meat for half a century, and I seem to be okay. And there are hundreds of millions of people around the world who don't eat meat and have good lives. I understand from medical people that there are some medical conditions for which it's important, and there's some people who think that a certain amount of animal protein is really useful for children at certain stages in their growth. But there's still lots of vegetarian children growing up, and so that should really go to a health professional. No, I don't, generally speaking, not that I know of. There is a place for animals, I should say one other thing though. There is a place for animals on the landscape. As I said earlier, a lot of landscapes evolved with animals. And so a purely vegan lifestyle where we had no room for any kind of grazing animals would also have a problem. But we're so far from that. The landscape needs a certain number of animals, but not billions or trillions or whatever it is we've got now in terms of domestic meat animals. Almost all of the biomass of the entire world now is domesticated animals. That's not sustainable or necessary.
And if anyone would like some more specific information on that answer, we do have some dietitians here with the help.
Dietitians, ask a dietitian. Excellent.
A really easy question. Because the reports that you referenced at the back are no longer on the Environmental Commissioner website, what's your website? Where can we get these reports?
Oh, right. Thank you. Clue on the slide, saxevax.com. Thank you very much for that. You'll see if you go to the website, there is a reports tab, or you go to the menu of the reports tab, and all the reports are there. I'm having a little problem with the tab at the moment, but they definitely are there under the reports on the menu. I did 17 reports as Environmental Commissioner on energy, environment, and climate, and most of them are still relevant, and they're all still there. And there's a free webinar for each report as well, so if you don't want to bother reading the report, you can just watch the webinar while you're doing the ironing or whatever.
This is a very specific question. In replacing a residential heating system, does electrically fired heating result in fewer GHG emissions than natural gas?
Absolutely. Yes, and. So, lots of people want to start by changing their heating system. You should start by reducing the heat load of your building. So you'll save much more money if first you make the building more efficient. The less energy you have to bring in, the less it's going to cost you. So if you put a new heating system in an old house that leaks all kind of heat, you're going to be wasting a lot of money sending heat out to the outdoors, and that doesn't do anybody any good. So by far the first thing to do is to stop all the leaks and improve the windows and increase your insulation and maybe have heat recovery out of your wastewater system. But whatever you can to keep, once you've generated heat in your house, you want to keep it there. There's no point sending it outside. So that's absolutely the first thing to do. The second thing to do is once you've minimized how much heat you need in the house, and sometimes that also means things like a programmable thermostat and making my daughter put a sweater on. Is then to say, all right, now whatever heat you still need, what's the best way to do it? make a lot of our electricity from coal. So there's lots of detail about this in the electricity report. So we used to get about a fifth of our electricity from coal. Anybody remember when the air when we went into Toronto was yellow? You could see that whole filthy smear across the horizon. That was coal. Most of that was coal. Anybody remember? First of all, does anybody here know somebody with asthma? Okay. How many smog days did we have in Ontario in 2005? Come on, you were all alive in 2005. How many smog days did we have? 53. We closed the last coal plant in Ontario in April 2014. That summer, how many smog days did we have? 0! 0. We've had virtually 0 ever since then. That makes a big difference for anybody who breathes, and especially anybody with lung issues. And so, huge improvement in air quality, huge reduction in mercury going into the fish, which is what poisons the fish, is coal burning, is what puts all that mercury in the fish, most of it. And it also dramatically reduced the greenhouse gas emissions from our electrical system. Also, green energy that's been added to it, and energy conservation, which has reduced our energy demand, all of which has been recently canceled, mostly canceled, has replaced the coal. So what that means is that most of the time in Ontario, using electricity doesn't create any emissions, any greenhouse gas emissions. And so somebody tells you they've replaced their streetlights, and so with LEDs, and they should, and they save a batch of money, but they don't save any emissions because by and large at night we don't have any emissions from our electrical system. We have emissions from our electrical system usually on hot summer afternoons and on very, very cold winter days. What all that is going to say is if you have a choice between natural gas and electricity, of course we should use electricity, but you want to do it as efficiently as possible. Never baseboard heaters, they are stupid and out of date. Heat pumps, much more efficient, but the first thing to do is to eliminate everything you can in terms of waste heat. So that's a long answer, but does that make sense? Yes? Okay.
That's great. Touching on a conversation we started over dinner, what is the best way to develop a municipal compost system? Reasons for not doing this in this area, being Parry Sound, have been bears and other animals that may be attracted. Is there a good source of info that you can recommend, a good link, resource?
Right. So as I said in one of the slides, let me see if I go back and find it, there are, there's a lot of things you can, oh yes, right there. So if you've got food that it can't be used for feeding people and can't be used for feeding animals, because quite often it can, then the question is, what do you do with it next? And so there's two things. You can compost, which is breaking down food waste in the presence of oxygen, and that gets you compost and a lot of carbon dioxide. Or you can break it down without oxygen, which means it has to be in a contained vessel that keeps the oxygen out, and then you get a lot of methane, which you can capture and use as a fuel, and you get the digestate, which is, as I understand it, not quite as good as compost, but still very good for soil. So you've got at least those two choices. If you've got a big concern about bears, and I don't pretend to be a bear expert, I mean, I think I saw a big, yes, bear expert right there, but if you did anaerobic digestion, you're doing it all indoors in a contained facility. So unless you've got really, really, really smart bears here, I think you'd be okay with a contained digestion system. And you then get useful methane. So that's what we're looking at. Stratford is looking at co-digesting food waste with sewage sludge, because sewage sludge is also, I mean, food has a lot of organic material in it, right? And also produces a lot of methane, so which then the municipality has to amend. But if you put them together, you can get economies of scale to make more methane and less cost, and then that might be something that would make sense here.
It seems there's very little education and awareness about the amount of carbon that is released by going on the internet and using cell phones. Where's the best information to get on this topic?
Right, so this again is sometimes misinformation, because if you go on the internet and you ask questions about, what are the emissions from using electricity, you're mostly going to get information from the United States, and their electricity is dirtier than ours in most places. So remember I told you, in Ontario, most of the electricity doesn't have any greenhouse gas emissions. So if the server that you're using, if the computer farm you're using is using Ontario electricity or Manitoba electricity or Quebec electricity, it's pretty clean. The big carbon footprint I would be worrying about there is what are they using to keep the place cool? Because when you've got lots of computers, usually you have to have a cooling system, and refrigerants are really bad climate damages. So we looked at, in this, oops, oh dear, I just realized, well, this thing that's on the back there, that's on my website, the individual carbon footprint, we looked at how much was services, internet, and so on, and eyeballing it here, I would guess it's about a fifth or sixth of the average carbon footprint is all the services, including internet, that we use. There's not a lot of things that individuals can do about reducing that in relation to, there's a lot of value to actually having access to the internet. But there is a lot of innovation going on. So for example, I visited someone who's at the University of Toronto who's developing a system for providing cooling for data centers without any refrigerants, which would and also add about a quarter of the energy using little particles with made out of nanoparticles, little beads made of nanoparticles. So I think there is technology coming for that. In the short run, there isn't much, but at least in Ontario, it's not as bad.
Dr. Saxe, what are your thoughts on peak oil and peak oil's impact to reduce greenhouse gases?
So peak oil was a theory, I think it was developed by a geologist called Hubbard, that as human demand for oil continued to rise, the supply would peak and fall off, and then we'd be in a crunch because we wouldn't have enough oil to meet human needs. And then there's some very dramatic stories about what would happen to everybody after the oil ran out. That didn't happen. So this is one of those cases where technology showed up, and we have fracking, and fracking can get oil out of all kinds of places that you didn't used to be able to get fracking in. So peak oil supply just doesn't seem to be on the horizon. In fact, now we worry about the other thing, which is we now know where there is so much oil that if we burned on the oil we have already, we fry the planet. So just look at the amount of so-called proven reserves that are traded on the stock exchanges today. I can't remember the number, but they're 2 or 3 times larger than the total amount of carbon that the atmosphere could absorb and still give us any kind of stable climate. So now we have a different problem. Now we need oil demand to drop. It's not that we're going to run out, and we're seeing this play out in the international stock markets right now. Exxon just had its, I read that it was just downgraded by Moody's because they're spending so much on developing new oil supplies that aren't likely to pay back at current prices and at the rate they're burning through their cash. We've had the Saudi Aramco company going to the markets, and they've got their prospectus, and even they are now saying, well, oil demand is going to drop a lot sooner than they used to think it was going to happen. The International Energy Agency keeps coming out with new projections that oil demand is going to drop faster. Because the really big news is that, and I have to say the Chinese get a lot of the credit for this, is they have dramatically driven down the cost of solar, wind, batteries, electric vehicles. The Chinese are the world champions. They have more electric vehicles than anywhere else in the world. They produce more solar than anywhere else in the world. They produce more wind than anywhere else in the world. They spent, I was told, $50 billion taking over world solar manufacturing and making it cheaper, and they now have more and more of the intellectual property. So renewable energy in many places is now cheaper than coal. I was reading about a coal plant in North Carolina that is actually bought into a solar farm so that they can shut down their coal plant because it's cheaper. The Kentucky Coal Museum put solar panels on their roof to save money. So the cost of storage batteries is coming down dramatically. So that's, sort of the best, most hopeful news we have, is how quickly renewables and storage are becoming cheaper and better. I have a plug-in electric car, and it is so much better than my old gasoline car. It is more fun to drive, it is quieter, it is less vibration, people get in it and they love it. My neighbor even moved it once and said, oh, I really like this, right? It's a lot of things about the new renewable world are just better, make you like it.
This question says it's from a snowbird. I'm not making that up. It says, can you please expand on personal carbon credits related to flying, no doubt?
You mean offsets?
Yeah, it says carbon credits, but carbon offsets, I'm sure. And can you recommend some organizations that are best to buy them from?
Right. So, so the question is, if you fly anyway, and I fly too, I have a daughter and grandchildren in the United States that I want to see. I buy offsets. Now, if you want to geek out about offsets, which you probably don't, there's a whole chapter about them in here, about which ones are good and which ones aren't, and for a short run, anything that says they're planting trees, don't buy those. But there definitely are good ones, and there's quite a few good ones on carbon zero, which I've been buying. Again, I don't buy the forestry ones, but anything that displaces fossil fuel. So here's a silly one that I thought made sense, which is there's an awful lot of swimming pools heated with natural gas. We can heat swimming pools with solar water heaters. By and large, you're not needing the swimming pool when it's snowing. So you need the swimming pool when the sun is hottest, and we have long days during the summer where you get the most heat, and so solar water heating for swimming pools in Canada makes just an awful lot of sense. And so that was one where, does the world really need warm swimming pools? They're nice, but not really a human necessity, but nevertheless, having solar instead of gas is better. And then there's various other ones. And something else I just put some money into was a program to pay for solar freezers for women in very poor countries where they don't have access to electricity, so they can actually keep food cool so it doesn't rot. Those kind of projects I think are absolutely worth doing, and then flying with my grandchildren, I don't feel so bad.
We had an intern at the Biosphere who looked into some of the best carbon offset outlets, and she recommended something called the gold standard.
Yes, well, so that's a standard, right? Carbon zero isn't a standard, they're just a company selling things. But yes, gold standard is, they've got very high, trying to improve the world things, and their numbers are legit. So if it's a gold standard certified credit, then it's not greenwashing.
So next, what is the best personal carbon footprint calculator that you have come across?
Well, so the challenge in Ontario is that to use one from outside Ontario is going to give you wrong information because our electricity system is different. So the best one I know of in Ontario is Project Neutral. It's not perfect by any means, but it's pretty good. And so that's if you want to actually calculate out, if you're prepared to look at your natural gas bill and look at your electricity bill and figure out how many kilometers you drive a year, and you know what kind of car you're driving, that kind of thing, then you've got enough information to fill those out. But we can be pretty sure that all of us are using too much. So.
How viable is Quebec's hydroelectric power for Ontario?
Right. Yes. So. So Quebec has flooded very large areas, so leaving aside the ecological destruction that has flooded the areas, they do have a lot of hydroelectric power. Jack Gibbons has very successfully given the impression that we could just be buying that instead of what we're doing in Ontario. And I looked into that and concluded that he's wrong. We can buy more power from Quebec than we do some of the time. However, the big thing you need to know about electricity is that we want it a lot some of the time and not very much a lot of the time. So our use of electricity goes like this. And it goes like this on a daily cycle, on a weekly cycle, and on a seasonal cycle. So we, on a weekend or a middle of the night, in the spring and the fall, we don't use very much electricity in Ontario. And our nuclear plants make more than that. So leaving aside everything else, we tend to have excess power on nights and weekends in the spring and fall just because we have these big nuclear plants and they put out power like this all the time, right? You don't turn a nuclear plant up and down. On a hot summer afternoon, we're probably using more than twice as much power as that. So when it's a hot summer afternoon, we're using all the power we can get. And at least in the 3 years before I did this report, the electricity report, each of the previous 3 years, once in the summer, our system got to the breaking point where our independent electrical system operator had to notify other surrounding systems that we were in trouble, that if we had any other problems, we were going to need help. So this story we get told that we have lots of extra power is true when we don't need it. It's not true when we need it the most. So now we come to Quebec. So how do we get power from Quebec? It doesn't come by magic. First of all, they have to be willing to sell it to us. And secondly, we have to have transmission to get it to us. Quebec, so far, is a winter peaking system. They use twice as much power roughly in the winter as they do in the summer. So they are not prepared to sell firm power in the winter. Right? They will not guarantee to supply power in the winter because they have their peak in the winter. When we have really cold winter days, we get a lot of demand for power. They don't guarantee to sell us power then. So that's the first problem. Second problem is on the hot summer days, when they do have extra power and we want power, then we have a transmission problem. And our transmission lines on the hot summer days are pretty much at their limit. So when we don't need much power, Quebec has a lot to sell us and we have capacity. But we don't need it then. When we really need it, either they won't sell it or we can't get it here. So yes, we should probably eventually build a really big new transmission line. That doesn't happen fast. When I started my first job with the Ontario government in 1975, I worked on an electrical transmission line, and 30 years later, it got built. So in 30 years, maybe we can get power from the back. So we're going to close down Pickering in 2024 anyway, so we're not going to have the new transmission line by then, and then we're going to have much more interesting questions about how to keep the lights on hot summer's afternoons. Did that make sense to everybody? It was a long answer. But...
In many European countries, garbage is burned in special incinerators with scrubbers in the chimneys. This provides heat to apartment buildings and public buildings. Why do we not do this in Ontario?
Well, there's no technological reason why we can't do it in Ontario. It was sort of a political allergy. 30 years ago, incinerators were dirty. They created a lot of dioxins, which is very, very highly toxic. They've made a lot of other kind of filth, and there became a widespread belief that incinerators were really, really, really bad. Modern technology isn't like that, and there is, in fact, a big waste incinerator in Durham. Durham? I think it's Durham. The other reason that some people oppose incinerators is that they believe we need to reduce waste production and that the pressure for reducing waste production will disappear if we build something that needs lots of waste to feed it. So those are the two main reasons we haven't done it. When you come to a sort of head-to-head analysis, is it better to have modern incinerators with heat recovery or landfills better? I'm pretty hard-pressed to say the landfills are better, but I didn't do the actual detailed analysis. And I don't have researchers anymore.
What is the effect of the provincial government cancelling the wind farm projects?
Bad. So 752 clean power projects were cancelled in Ontario. 216 of those have significant First Nations participation. So all the stuff we talk about, reconciliation and giving First Nations an economic base and jobs for the young people in the way of participating in the economy on an equal basis, we kicked them in the teeth. We also did the following to improve our reputation internationally as a place to invest. In 2014, Ontario went to international markets and invited the world's best renewable energy providers to come to Ontario and to make a competitive bid for large-scale renewable power at the cheapest possible prices. There were 106 expressions of interest. There were 2 years of multi-million-dollar evaluation process. We picked 16 proposals. They got contracts. They then spent millions of dollars more seeking local approvals and Indigenous consent and buying land and all of that stuff. And how many of those do you suppose we tore up? 10 of the 16 so far, and now we have new yammering that they're going to tear out more contracts. And right after that, the International Electricity System Operator said, well, gee, I'm not sure how we're going to keep power on the hot peak demand days now after 2023. Plus, of course, we've got this $100 million or whatever is being spent to tear down White Pines wind turbines, which were mostly built. It's a travesty and a tragedy, and we need that power. I did, in my last report, my last climate report, we commissioned an economic model of what is the cheapest way, let's not waste any money, what is the cheapest way of giving us a path to a green economy future? And the steps were really clear. Number one, maximize energy conservation. So, of course, we canceled the batch of energy conservation programs. Number two is to squeeze all fossil fuels out of electricity, use clean power for all of our electricity needs, which is what the clean power projects were going to do. Number three, electrify everything that can be electrified. Because we cannot keep burning fossil fuels without setting our world on fire. And those renewable power projects were part of that. And it's a very long process. So water power, for example, water power projects, I forget how many of the 16 water power projects. It takes on average, if you're lucky, 10 years to go from a proposal to an actual built water project that is producing power. And a number of those were in the middle and been torn up. So we're cutting off our nose to spite our face, but instead the government is setting up financial incentives so people will build more natural gas power.
This note complements your presentation to start, but it makes the point that most of the people here are already the converted, and asks how you would get your message to the people who chose not to come tonight.
Right. Good question. Fair point, of course. I mean, one thing that I do is I'm on the road. I mean, I'm not asking you folks to come to Toronto. I'm in a different city every week, going to meet people where they are. That's one of the ways to reach people, is to show up on their turn. And I provide as much information as I can on my website and on radio and television and other kinds of ways. But the more general answer is, it can't be all up to me, right? It can't be all up to Greta. It can't be all up to me. This is a general social problem. And Ed Maybach has done the best research on climate communications, I think, and so he has 11 magic words that I'm going to ask you to memorize. Simple, clear messages.
Simple, clear messages.
Repeated often.
Repeated often.
By a variety of trusted voices. Let's do this together. Simple, clear messages. Repeated often. By a variety of trusted voices. So each of you is a trusted voice for some people. And you know other people who are trusted voices. Who is the most, according to the Veracity annual survey, who is the most trusted profession in the world? Who do people trust to tell the truth? Is it lawyers? Is it politicians? Who is number one? Nurses. Nurses. Right? Doctors, vets, other health professions way up there. Right? Lots of people trusted a vet. So, if you know someone who's, the people that do have people they trust, that they listen to. Maybe it's their religious community, maybe it's their bowling league, maybe it's their doctor, but somebody they look up to, somebody they trust, someone who feels like me. Well, those are the folks that can reach other people. So if you have a church community, that's a great way to reach other people. If you have, I don't know, are you a member of Anglers and Hunters? Go get on a committee. If you've got a farming league, get on the Ontario Farmers Association. Get on those committees. Go to the places where the other folks are and see if there's common ground. It's not, it's not a question. There's a wonderful book called I'm Right and You're an Idiot. Right? Because a lot of people say to me, how do I make those people see the light? That doesn't work. But there often is common ground. There often is something people care about. Maybe it's gardening, maybe it's hunting, maybe it's the grandchildren, where there is some kind of common ground. And food can be a great way to bring people together. No matter what people's political opinions, they probably like sharing a meal with neighbors. Maybe that's the way to do it. The Climate Fast has training sessions on how to have a carbon conversation. You can look up this and some recipes online. How to have a carbon conversation with your neighbors. Have a dinner together, potluck, talk about local food, use it as a bridge if you can. So find common ground, build a human bridge, talk to the people that other people trust. But this doesn't work.
What are your thoughts on growing food with hydroponics or aquaponics?
I tried once and I couldn't do it. There are lots of different ways to grow food, and as long as it's lightly on the earth, then it works. Someone was telling me at dinner that you can grow tomatoes in a slightly rotting bale of hay. I'd never do that. So I think we need to try lots of stuff, but we can't do it just expecting the chemicals and pesticides are going to do it. We're going to need to find ways where the whole cycle works and we can still breathe and comes out the other end.
In terms of research, what is one or some of the top research areas for climate change that are still needed?
Oh my goodness. Oh, there's so many. Well, one of them is the whole communication issue. That's an area of very hot research, is what are the best means of communicating different kinds of things with different audiences, so that one's great. There's lots of areas of technology. I mentioned the guy in his lab with the nanoparticles looking for better ways to cool cooling centers. I was just reading today about some wonderful research on how to actually smelt metals with a solar, concentrated solar. Because right now you can't do metallurgy with electricity. You have to use fossil fuels, but now there's a breakthrough that you can in fact get high enough temperatures. Climate changes everything, and that also means that almost everything has a way forward. I'd say in the food world, anything that would help reduce food waste would be just tremendously valuable. Better ways of making use of food waste, better ways of growing food where we are, so that we don't have to be, a lot of what we think is normal is just habit. Again, some of you look like you're my age. When I was young, people didn't have oranges every day or orange juice every day. This was a real hard sell campaign to make us think that every day needs oranges that have to be flown in from someplace else. And we switched back to apple juice and we did just fine, thank you very much. And then, of course, my kids realized that they shouldn't be giving the babies juice anyway, but it's... we can have really good lives that are lighter on the earth, lighter on our neighbors, in many cases lighter on our wallets. We've accumulated a whole bunch of bad, lazy habits, and they don't make our lives better.
So this question references a film that was shown recently in Parry Sound. Was it Anthropocene?
Oh, it was Anthropocene.
Anthropocene.
I'm sorry, what's the question? Oh,
2D. So this film showed.
Yes, I've seen the film.
And Christine. Okay, so it
So
showed.
it's a series of devastatingly awful photos of what we're doing to the world.
Yeah, it's very heavy film. Catastrophic damage to
And
landscapes.
if you go online and look on it, you'll look on, Google it, search it, you'll find some of the pictures.
So the film questions the high cost of making batteries, including lithium production. How does this factor into environmental protection in Canada and Ontario?
Right, so I was part of a really fascinating conference last week in Ottawa by Mining Watch called Turning Down the Heat, which is all about human demand for metals and how to reconcile that with the green transition, including the human rights and environmental impacts of our demand for metals. It certainly is a challenge. One of the pieces definitely is we can't just swap everything out. And we can't turn every gasoline-powered car into an electric car and think things are okay. The amount of metal needed to do that would be so large that its cost would be very large in terms of human rights and environmental issues and even the emissions from the mining. But we could certainly come up with enough lithium to have a whole batch of electric buses. We can, which doesn't make as much sense in Parry Sound as it does in Toronto. I think we are. The Mining Watch has posted the videos of all the sessions from that conference. So if you're really interested in metals and how metals are going to play into the green transition and some of the conflicts around the world that this is causing, it's called Turning Down the Heat by Mining Watch, and I think it's all on YouTube. And we also have to find better ways of obtaining lithium that are not as devastating for the local people or for the environment. And once we have lithium, we have to keep it in circulation and not use it once and throw it away. It is also true, though, that batteries can be used, first of all, in a vehicle for whatever number of years, and then used as stationary storage. So they can provide. The reason you take a battery out of a car is that the power to weight ratio degrades. But if you had a batch of batteries in a garage on a concrete floor, you don't care how much they weigh. And so they can be refurbished and used for electricity storage and voltage regulation and other kinds of things for another 5 to 10 years after that. So you don't need to recycle them right away. You reuse them over and over again as batteries. And meanwhile, we've got to come up with really good ways of getting the lithium back out of those batteries and using it again. We have to have a circular economy for precious things like that. So that would be a good thing to research. Circular economy for lithium.
I will say too, I'm down to about 3 questions, so if you're holding on to a notepad or holding on to a question, anything else burning in your mind, please wave it around in the next few minutes. Dr. Saxe, recently there has been a call from doctors, professors, public health figures, past presidents of royal colleges for widespread, non-violent civil disobedience in the face of the environmental crisis. If government decision makers aren't taking drastic policy measures to curb emissions, is this the answer?
Yes. Yes, and thank you to Fridays for Future people. Having people in the streets has changed the conversation, and it needs to continue, and it needs to be more of it. And if anybody's got a kid out on the streets, they deserve to have their grandparents with them. We owe them. And besides, we don't get that much time with them.
Things like the Beyond Burger get a lot of media attention. Can you comment on the carbon footprint of processed plant-based proteins versus a whole food such as chickpeas or nuts?
I haven't seen the numbers. I don't know the answer to that, sorry.
I don't know either. I don't want to go vegan or vegetarian, but if I was to make one small dietary change, what would have the biggest impact?
Less beef. Yeah, and certainly never feedlot beef. That would be the single most powerful thing to do.
So,
And then, of course, there's always eating what's local in season, which also tastes better.
So this is a very basic question about food composting. Backyard composts say no oil and dairy. Is this a problem for composting systems? Is it true? And if so, what do we do with oil and dairy?
So, the big commercial composting systems, as far as I've ever heard, have no problem with any kind of food waste. They get choked with plastic. Plastic is a big problem. One of the things that's causing lots of trouble is these so-called compostable plastics. So people buy these things thinking they're doing a good thing, and they usually cause trouble. Because either they go into the blue bin where they contaminate large loads of plastic in the blue bin, which all has to be thrown in. Or they go into the compost system, which usually isn't designed for them, and they contaminate there and don't break down. So compostable plastic was meant from, the intention was good, but in practice, from what I'm told, the municipal compost systems can't break them down fast enough. So if you want to really screw up both blue box and composting, compostable plastics are the thing. But for any other kind of composting, maybe just keep the plastic out. And then, of course, one of my bête noirs is I have managed to mostly train my family that food waste goes in the green bin, but they don't take the bloody labels off. So next spring, I'm still hand-picking the labels out of the compost and take the labels off.
Aside from a reduction of beef in the diet, what other foods would help to decrease an individual carbon footprint? For example, avoiding palm oil or avoiding specific companies that are major polluters?
It's not that simple. I really think that the two big things for individuals are food choice, and I talked about that a little bit. I mean, beef is one, and expensive, flown-in, heavy, out-of-season things is another. The second really big one is just buy what you need, and then eat what you buy. Right? Because that's what we often find is that people buy things and then it turns green in the back of the refrigerator after a while and throw it out again. You make something and the kid won't eat it. So that just as an approach, buy what you need and then eat it, would go a long way to reduce food waste and the overall carbon footprint, probably more than worrying about which company it is. There definitely are bad companies, but it's not. It's complicated what they do, and what you can also do, which is really useful, is whatever your local supermarket is, talk to the manager about your interest in buying local low-carbon food. So the managers, if they're not hearing from customers and you want this stuff, they're not going to prioritize it. If they hear from customers, they're more likely to make the point of looking for lower carbon food than maybe advertising. So never underestimate the benefit of playing. Actually, here's another thing, if you're going to be thinking about where you're playing, is our investments are also like huge carbon footprints, and the big Canadian banks are among the worst in the world for financing fossil fuel expansion. Scotiabank, I think, is third or fourth in the entire world in terms of financing fossil fuel expansion. Contrary to the Paris Agreement, RBC is, I think, fifth largest bank in the entire world in terms of funding fossil fuels. So if you own those shares or bank in those banks, go talk to your bank manager and ask them what they're doing to get their carbon footprint down. And why are they still supporting fossil fuel expansion, which is incompatible with the Paris Agreement? And if they don't get T's and N's, just tell them maybe look at a credit union. And ask if you've got a pension, ask them. Pension funds have the most money, and they have to care what their beneficiaries say. I'm already hearing back from some of the pension funds that they're hearing from their beneficiaries, and that makes a difference. If you want to learn how to be a really effective beneficiary, there's a group called SHIFT, and they teach beneficiaries how to raise these issues and to do it effectively, and it makes a difference. And you should certainly give CPVIP hell their buying coal. So there you go, more good things to do. So there you go, everybody's done homework, right? Is there anybody who doesn't have homework? All right, thank you very much, everybody.